Confronted my husband about the excessive time my sister spends at our house half-dressed, but he said it's my issue to resolve. My husband James, 34 male, and I, 29F, have a long and intertwined history, one that gets more complicated by the presence of my sister, Fran, 34F. Growing up, James and I were neighbors, but we didn't exactly run in the same circles. He was the same age as Fran, and she was always the star, brilliant, popular, beautiful. Everybody knew her, including James. He didn't hide his huge crush on her, it was obvious to all of us. For senior prom, he asked her out in front of the entire school, and she shot him down just as publicly. Despite the rejection, they stayed friends. When he went away for college, he was mostly a holiday visitor, and I didn't see much of him. At the time, I was just a middle schooler, too young to be really included in anything Fran and James did, and I'd often be excluded completely whenever they hung out. Years later, after college, my mom suggested I reach out to James when I moved to his city for my first job, since I didn't know anyone else there. We became friends, and, eventually, we fell in love. After 3 years of friendship, we got married, both with solid jobs, happy together. When COVID hit, James's mother's health problems prompted us to move back home, which we could do because our jobs went remote. Fran's life, however, hit a massive setback. She married young, at 23, to a well-off man, but 2 years ago, she discovered he had cheated for almost the whole marriage, with multiple partners. She left him, expecting ample alimony, but a prenup left her nearly empty-handed. She's been struggling financially ever since, forced to live with my mother, working a job that barely covers her expenses. James and I tried to be as supportive as we could during Fran's ordeal. Even now, since she grew up with James, they share a special bond, always laughing at old stories and inside jokes, which, honestly, occasionally leave me feeling like a third wheel. James does try to include me, but Fran is constantly at our house, 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes even sleeping over unannounced. I appreciate that she wants company, but it grates on me that she seems to be there mostly for James. She often shows up when I'm not home, and I'll walk in to find them sitting side by side on the sofa, watching TV. It brings back those old childhood memories, locked out of the fun, resented for being the tag-along kid. Fran feels overly comfortable, sometimes too much so. She'll walk around in a towel or sleep in her underwear in the guest room, leaving the door open even when she knows James could see her. I've raised this with her, told her I don't like it, but she tells me we're all family, so it shouldn't matter. I've told James, too. He does make an effort now to loop me in on their jokes, but he's mostly brushed off my concerns about Fran's behavior. The main issue boiled over this past weekend. My mom, Fran, and I were reminiscing. Fran joked about how James used to do her homework and chores out of love for her. Laughing, she said, "He was so much in love with me, and I always felt guilty taking advantage." My mom chimed in, half joking, that she wished Fran had married James instead, because with both James and me being high earners, and Fran struggling, it would make sense. She insisted it was just a hypothetical, but the comment stung. I protested, made it clear I didn't want her talking about my husband that way. My mother doubled down, insisting it was harmless, just wishing happiness on us both. Fran shrugged it all off and told me I was being too sensitive. I stormed out after fighting with them, feeling both insulted and oddly invisible. When I shared it with James, he also waved it away as a harmless joke. When I brought up Fran's behavior around the house, he told me it was something between me and my sister, that he wouldn't police how Fran dressed in our home. Despite everyone's apologies, I can't shake how off everything feels. I'm left wondering if I'm overreacting, or if everyone else is just refusing to see the disrespect. I know Fran has always treated me like the little kid, not a peer, not even really as a grown woman. I've always felt a bit envious of the attention she commands, while I was the odd one out in the family, the nerdy little sister. Maybe that's coloring my reaction, but I just can't shake this feeling that something's off. I lay awake, rethinking everything, how Fran's presence, her actions, and even her jokes constantly undermine me or minimize my feelings. I trust James wholeheartedly, but this strange dynamic, and everyone's willingness to dismiss my discomfort, has shaken my sense of security in my own home. I know I need to have a real conversation with James, not accusing, just honest. These boundaries matter, and I won't allow myself to be talked over or belittled, not by my sister, my mom, or anyone else. Update 1. The comments I've been hearing lately really got under my skin and paranoia began to take root in my mind. Everyone kept pointing out that maybe James married me just because he had a crush on Fran for years, and that idea sent my anxiety through the roof. Driven by those doubts, I started snooping around. It's funny, because James actually insists I check his phone for messages when he's not around, so I knew there wasn't anything suspicious hidden there. Still, I couldn't shake the strange feeling about how Fran always seemed to know when I wasn't home, and the unnerving pattern of coming in to find James and Fran always sharing the same couch. I tried to talk to James about how I felt. He was careful to validate my feelings but refused to say anything negative about my mom or Fran, only mentioning that Fran was going through a tough time. Last Friday, as usual, I went to the gym in the evening. When I returned home, Fran was sitting in our living room, and James was busy cooking dinner. My irritation flared. I asked Fran what she was doing here, and she replied she had no plans for the night and just came to hang out with us. I was annoyed and told her I wanted a quiet weekend with my husband and asked if she could come some other time. She could see that I was upset. She tried to brush off our mother's earlier comments, saying Mom was just being silly and I needed to let it go, because it was only a joke. But I told her I didn't find it funny, and quickly, things escalated into a fight. Fran lashed out, calling me an insecure, annoying kid, and said no one liked me, which hurt more than I wanted to admit. At that moment, James stepped in, forceful in a way I hadn't seen before, and told Fran she needed to leave. Fran grumbled, murmured something unpleasant to James, and then left. I was left in tears, and James sat with me, consoling me. I was heartbroken and spent the rest of the night alone in our room. The next morning, I made a list of everything bubbling in my mind that I needed to ask James. Those nagging doubts and anxieties were clearer, thanks to all the ideas swirling in my head. I worried, maybe unfairly, whether James really married me for who I am or just because I was Fran's sister, especially since through high school, everyone used to call me Dollar Store Fran. James and I had a long, honest conversation. I spilled everything, my anxieties, insecurity about how close he and Fran seemed, their inside jokes, and I asked outright if he still had any feelings for her. He was calm, kind, even smiling at me. He told me he'd be honest but wanted me to promise not to hate him later. He admitted he realized long ago that Fran was using him during school because she knew he liked her. When college whisked him away, Fran kept trying to stay in touch, but the distance helped him see how badly she'd treated him, so he cut things off and focused on himself. That was why he rarely visited during holidays and drifted apart from Fran. I confess that it hurt me he seemed to choose Fran over me and ignored me growing up, this deep doubt that I was his second choice. James just smiled and pointed out that when he left for college, I was only 13, and if he'd liked me instead of Fran back then, it would have been a very different, and troubling, situation. He told me that when I first reached out to him, he assumed I'd be just like Fran and didn't feel excited about meeting me. But after we hung out a few times, he realized I was nothing like her at all. We got closer, we dated, we fell in love, and eventually we married. Around that time, Fran was already married, and James said he'd always noticed how I put Fran on a pedestal, getting jealous every time Fran shared vacation photos or flashed the latest thing her husband bought for her. That's why he never said much about disliking hanging around Fran. He knew for me, she was always my North Star. James explained he has always kept his distance from Fran, and since we only saw her a few times a year, she was never an issue, until after Fran's divorce. Then he honestly didn't know how to act. Since I moved us to my hometown so I could help care for his mother, James said he only wanted to reciprocate and support my family too. When Fran went through her divorce, he tried hard to support her for my sake, even though it meant spending more time with her and rehashing memories from high school that he just wanted to forget. I brought up how much it bothers me that Fran comes over so often, usually in the evenings when I head to the gym. James admitted he also found it odd that she knows my workout schedule and drops by when I'm not home. He reassured me again that he's always maintained a respectful distance, and if Fran did anything suspicious or crossed the line, I'd be the first to know. Mostly, Fran comes by, makes him rewatch old movies or TV shows from their high school years, and gossips about old classmates. James told me to trust him, and said that if I wanted, he could be the bad guy and ask Fran not to come over so often, but he worried later I'd make up with her and then resent him for being harsh. He also said he wouldn't police what Fran wears around the house because that would be too creepy coming from him. After our talk, I felt so much reassurance from James. He truly is an amazing husband, and I knew I could trust him. On Sunday, my mom and Fran both came to visit. My mom apologized again, promising she never meant to hurt me, never wished anything bad for our marriage, and only meant to say that James was a great guy, someone she hoped Fran would find one day. Fran was still a bit sour but apologized for calling me names during our fight, blaming it on her hormones. She confessed she likes hanging out with me and her best friend, and that's why she comes over so much. I told her she's welcome, but she should call first in case James and I have plans, and she agreed. I truly hope we can move past this. But I do intend to set boundaries about when Fran can come by and especially about her spending time alone with James, since it clearly bothers him, too. All things considered, I feel so much better, relieved my worst fears were unfounded. Still, I realize I probably need a bit of therapy to deal with these insecurities I've been carrying around for far too long. Update 2. It's been a while since everything went down, and honestly, I'm still catching my breath. The emotional highs and lows have kept me on edge, but somehow, James and I have come out of it stronger and more united. Navigating this wild family landscape is still a challenge, one that's taught me a lot about myself, especially when it comes to my sister and my mom. Therapy has been, without a doubt, a real turning point for me. I shrugged off the idea at first, skeptical and certain it wouldn't help. But, wow, was I wrong? It's been eye-opening to realize that so many of my reactions, the anxiety and jealousy, were really rooted in the kind of childhood baggage I'd been dragging around for years. Turns out, feeling less than because I always lived in Fran's shadow, and the little flickers of insecurity that stem from all that, had been fueling so much of the tension. Working through these issues, getting to the core, has brought a level of clarity I didn't know I needed. James has been amazingly supportive, even though it's not easy for him to open up about feelings, so I know it means a lot when he supports me like this. That, right there, is all the proof I need that he's committed, and I'm grateful every day that he's mine. But let me tell you, the plot thickened in a way I never saw coming. Last weekend, Fran showed up, unannounced, typical Fran, and she didn't come alone. She brought her new boyfriend, which wasn't a shock in itself. It's been 2 years since her divorce, after all. What did throw me off, though, was who he turned out to be. When Fran introduced him, "This is Tim, my new boyfriend," the name alone made nerves prickle up my spine. I recognized him, and so did James. This was the same guy they both knew from high school. Not just any guy, Tim was the one James used to obsess over, the one Fran dumped on a whim yet strung along for years before eventually moving on to her ex-husband. It was surreal sitting there as Fran casually brought up their high school triangle. He and James used to fight over my attention, and, watching James visibly tense up. His smile wavered, but he tried to play it off. Beneath the surface, though, there was a jumble of unspoken emotion. I could feel my heart pounding, knowing what all of this meant for James, and how much history was sitting right there in my living room. I did what I could. I redirected the conversation, tried to make everything feel comfortable, but Fran and Tim exchanged these loaded glances, as if sharing some private joke. The weirdness was thick in the air. Later, after Tim went to the bathroom, James leaned in and whispered, "I really don't like him being here. It's messing with my head." Hearing the stress in his voice broke my heart. I knew it wasn't about our marriage, he was just being confronted by memories he would rather leave buried. I told him quietly that we should head out for some fresh air, no big deal, but I could see in my mom's eyes that she was picking up on the tension, too. A few days passed and I realized I needed to clear the air with Fran. When we were alone, I asked her directly, "Why did you invite Tim over? Did you really think that wouldn't make things weird, given the history?" Fran looked surprised. She honestly hadn't considered just how uncomfortable this would make James. "I didn't mean for it to cause a problem," she said. "He's just someone I've always had a connection with, and I didn't think it would be a big deal." I couldn't keep my frustration in. "You really didn't think it would be a big deal? You bring the one guy who had the biggest impact on James's teenage years into our home, and you act like it's nothing? I'm not okay with that." The air was thick with tension. Fran got defensive, but I stood my ground. Respect for boundaries is not optional, hers, James's, all of ours. She did apologize, though it felt reluctant. I needed her to understand that if she wanted to have a relationship with us, she had to leave the old high school drama in the past. It left me feeling conflicted. Fran, as always, tends to overlook how her actions affect other people when she gets caught up in nostalgia or excitement. Still, I felt better for having had that difficult conversation. It was one of the few times in our lives we were truly honest with each other. James and I are in a much better place now. We've become closer through all of this. For the first time, he set boundaries with Fran himself, telling her, "If you want to come over, text me first and make sure it's a good time. I can't keep handling unannounced visits, especially right now." Hearing him say that out loud made me so proud. I could see him protecting both himself and our relationship. Now, any visit from Fran is planned ahead, and both of us are on the same page. Fran, for what it's worth, has started coming by much less often. Maybe she's finally realizing that her drop-in whenever attitude doesn't work anymore. She still brings a healthy dose of chaos anytime she shows up, but for now, things are calmer. Best of all, James and I have reclaimed our time. We've been focusing on each other, spending evenings together without family interruptions. I feel closer to him than I have in ages, and I'm reminded every day of just how patient and supportive he is. I genuinely feel lucky to have him in my life. So, where does that leave us? Things are better, but not perfect. We've got a long road ahead, but at least we're walking it together, with firmer boundaries and a clearer sense of what matters most. It's wild to realize how much setting limits, both for family and ourselves, can change everything. As for Fran making a move on James, I still don't think she would. She's complex, but I think she's finally realizing her past with James belongs firmly in the past, and, for once, I'm at peace with it. Maybe, just maybe, we're finally writing a future without all that old drama. Update 3. Things have taken some serious turns lately, and I'm honestly not sure how to process it all. It feels like every time I start to believe we're on the path to healing, something else explodes, and suddenly we're not just back at square one, we're dealing with an even bigger mess. So let me rewind. After everything that had gone down, I really thought maybe, just maybe, we were starting to figure things out. The boundaries with Fran had been set, James and I were reconnecting, and, for once, my anxiety wasn't screaming in my ears. But right when I thought I had everything under control, Fran pulled the most wild and unexpected stunt yet. A few weeks ago, Fran started acting off, seriously off. She stopped coming over as much, which I secretly found refreshing at first. But then things turned strange. Out of nowhere, she began sending me these cryptic texts. "I need to talk to you about something important, and I've been thinking about everything that's happened." I felt my stomach twist with nerves. Fran and surprises aren't a great mix, but I tried to stay open-minded. Eventually, I agreed to meet her for coffee. That's where it all blew up. Fran looked me straight in the eyes and confessed that she'd been in love with James for years. I mean, I always knew she had a high school crush on him, but I had no idea it ran so deep. She told me her marriage fell apart because she was never truly over him and confided that, deep down, she'd always held on to hope. She admitted she had been waiting for the right moment to tell me. Yes, she actually said she was waiting for me to be emotionally distant enough from James so she could swoop in. I sat there, absolutely floored. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak, they all crashed over me in a single, sickening wave. But as she went on, I realized this wasn't just about James. It was about everything between her and me. Fran said she'd always felt like she was in my shadow, and after her divorce, struggling financially, feeling isolated, she thought she deserved a shot at the better life I had. In her eyes, that meant a life with James. I was struck completely silent. Everything I'd tried to rebuild with James suddenly felt so fragile. And then Fran hit me with the final bombshell. She told me she planned to tell James everything. No more secrets, no more waiting for my permission, she was just going to go for it. Fran even admitted she had been testing the waters, coming over to our house more, trying to see if there was any spark left between them when I wasn't around. At that moment, I almost lost it. The fury racing through my body left me shaking, but I knew, no matter how badly I wanted to explode, I had to keep my head, for my marriage and my own sanity. I got up, walked away from that coffee shop, drove straight home, and waited for James. When he came through the door that evening, I didn't even let him put his coat down. I blurted out every twisted detail Fran had shared, her confession, her intentions, her manipulation, all of it. I expected James to be shocked, maybe defensive, but he surprised me. His face turned ghostly pale and he calmly admitted, I knew she was up to something. And then, somehow, impossibly, things got even more insane. James told me Fran had been hinting at these feelings for months. When I wasn't around, she'd drop comments about how she always felt something for him, how she regretted letting him slip away, how their lives would have been so different if they'd ended up together instead of her ex-husband. At first, he hadn't taken her seriously, but I guess the subtle comments, the extra visits, her attempts to get close to him, they started piling up. He admitted he just didn't know how to tell me without turning it all into a massive conflict. The betrayal I felt when James finally told me this. It almost made me dizzy. Not just Fran, James, too. I thought we'd rebuilt our trust. I thought those painful secrets were behind us, that we finally understood each other. But suddenly, everything felt like it was falling apart. Yet, out of nowhere, instead of losing my temper, I felt this surprisingly sharp sense of clarity. I realized it was time to lay down boundaries, not just with Fran, but with James as well. I told him he had to be completely honest with Fran. No more sidestepping, no more quiet suffering. If she said anything, if she tried anything, he needed to shut it down instantly. I told him, we have to be a team. I'm not going to let her get away with this anymore. James agreed, shaken and remorseful. He told me he honestly hadn't realized how much Fran was hurting me, and I could tell he genuinely felt awful. He promised he'd talk to her, really talk to her, about her behavior. But he also told me the reason he hadn't said anything sooner was because he wanted to protect me from the pain, to avoid reigniting conflict between us. Hearing that made my heart sink a little lower. Now, we're here, sitting in the fallout. James is preparing himself for a hard conversation with Fran, not about her feelings, but about her actions and what's acceptable going forward. He's going to set clear boundaries, and let her know that if she wants to stay in our lives in any way, she needs to respect us, both of us. As for me, I'm still reeling, hurt, confused, paranoid. But I'm forcing myself to zero in on what I can control, my relationship with James. I do trust him, truly, but this whole thing has shaken me down to my core, and I don't know what the future holds. Update 4. After Fran dropped that bombshell about her feelings for James and after my intense conversation with him, I truly believed that we were starting to pick up the pieces. James had promised me he'd make things abundantly clear to Fran, shutting down any expectations she still harbored. Meanwhile, I focused on myself, therapy, self-care, the whole works. Frankly, after all we'd been through, for the first time I felt a cautious optimism. Maybe there was finally a way for us to move forward. But, of course, Fran had other ideas. One evening, James and I decided to carve out some rare time just for the two of us. We planned a proper date night, dinner, dancing, the kind of night we desperately needed to remind ourselves of who we were before everything went sideways. Walking through the door later that night, I actually caught myself thinking, maybe things are finally normal again. That fragile hope shattered as soon as I heard the message blinking on our answering machine. This wasn't just a polite check-in from Fran. No, this was the kind of message that freezes the blood in your veins. I pressed play and stood there in stunned silence as Fran's voice filled the room, a full-on confession. She talked about the possibilities between them, how she couldn't stop imagining what it would be like if they were together instead of me. As if that wasn't enough, she went on about feeling confused and conflicted, but insisted she knew they were meant to be together. Then came the punch in the gut. She said she was willing to fight for James, whatever it took, and claimed that I was just in the way. I was trembling. Both of us stood rooted to the spot, listening to every devastating word. After everything, after all the conversations, all the supposed closure, Fran had done this. To top it off, she'd left the voicemail while we were out, timing it so I couldn't possibly overhear. She knew what she was doing. But the worst was yet to come. By morning, I was still shaking with anger. I confronted James, looking for answers. He was as furious and bewildered as I was. I could see the hurt and confusion etched on his face. He insisted he wanted nothing to do with Fran romantically and couldn't believe she'd gone this far. So, we decided to confront Fran together. I wish I could say she was contrite or even embarrassed, but no, she was as brazen as ever. She spoke as if she was entitled to her feelings, like the world owed her something simply for wanting James. According to her, she'd waited for the right time to confess, and my own insecurities were apparently a flashing green light for her to move in. She went so far as to claim that she, not me, should have been James's wife, that she'd always been the better choice and that I was unworthy because I was too insecure. Fran stood there, trying to gaslight me into believing everything that was broken was somehow my fault. I was in absolute disbelief and by the end of it, in tears. The manipulation, the entitlement, it was all so much uglier than I ever imagined. And then the whole dynamic shifted. As Fran tried to twist the knife further, James snapped. He told her, with a firmness I'd never seen, that this was the end of the line. He wasn't going to indulge her behavior another second. If she couldn't respect boundaries, she was out of our lives. If she ever contacted us like this again, it would be a permanent end. Watching James stand up so decisively for us, for me, it was powerful, electrifying even. He didn't flinch as Fran tried to guilt him, accused him of blindness, or protested that he was giving up something they'd supposedly had. Nothing shook him. He turned to me afterward and said, without hesitation, "This is over. I don't want anything more to do with her. It's just you and me now." Only then did I truly realize how far Fran was willing to go. She hadn't just been hoping to win James back, she was actively trying to wreck my marriage, to obliterate everything James and I had fought to rebuild. And it was clear she didn't care how much she hurt me in the process. Now, we're completely no contact with Fran. James blocked her from everything, social media, messaging, the lot. I told my mom, point blank, that Fran wasn't welcome in our home unless some very serious boundaries were observed. My mom hasn't entirely liked the move. There have been tense discussions, but even she's coming around to how damaging Fran's behavior truly was. As for me, I'm left sorting through the wreckage. I'm working with my therapist to process the betrayal and pain. It's surreal realizing the sister I'd admired could stoop to such levels to dismantle my life. The wounds are there, but I'm taking it day by day. The silver lining? James and I have never been closer. Our communication has deepened, our trust is stronger, we're healing, step by painful step, and I know we'll pull through, together. As for Fran, she's gone from our lives. For good. Update 5. I thought cutting Fran out of our lives would be the end of this nightmare, but apparently, I was naive to think she'd just disappear quietly. The past few months have been a roller coaster that I never saw coming, and honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything that's happened. Things started getting weird about 6 weeks after we went no contact. James and I were finally settling into a peaceful routine, no surprise visits, no drama, just us rebuilding our marriage. I was actually starting to feel like myself again. Then my mom called, sounding frantic. "Fran's been asking about you two constantly," she said. "She keeps showing up here, crying, saying she made a mistake and wants to apologize. She's been driving by your house too." The driving by part made my skin crawl. James immediately wanted to call the police, but I convinced him to wait and see if it would stop. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Last month, I came home from work to find James sitting at our kitchen table, looking shell-shocked. In front of him was a thick manila envelope with no return address. Inside were printed copies of text messages, dozens of them, between James and Fran from years ago, back when they were in high school, but these weren't just any messages. Someone had highlighted specific parts to make it look like James had been leading Fran on, encouraging her feelings, even recently. "These are fake," James said immediately, his voice shaking. "I mean, some of these conversations happened, but they've been edited. Look at the dates, half of these are from when we were teenagers, but they're made to look recent." I studied the papers, my heart pounding. It was sophisticated manipulation. Whoever did this had taken real conversations and spliced them with fake ones, creating a narrative that James had been secretly encouraging Fran's advances all along. There were even messages that supposedly showed James complaining about our marriage and expressing regret about not choosing Fran. "She's lost her mind," I whispered, but deep down, a tiny voice wondered if maybe there was some truth buried in there. The insecurity I'd worked so hard to overcome in therapy started creeping back in. James must have seen the doubt in my eyes because he immediately pulled out his phone. "Look through everything," he said. "Every message, every call log. I have nothing to hide." I spent the next hour combing through his phone, and relief washed over me when I found nothing suspicious. The fabricated messages were clearly fake when compared to his actual message history, but the fact that Fran had gone to such lengths to create this elaborate deception was terrifying. We decided to involve the police this time. The officer who took our report was sympathetic but explained that unless Fran escalated to direct threats or physical harassment, there wasn't much they could do. He suggested we document everything and consider a restraining order if things got worse. They got worse. 2 weeks later, I was at work when James called, his voice tight with anger. She showed up at my office, he said. She somehow got past security and cornered me in the parking garage. She was crying, begging me to give her a chance, saying you were holding me back from my true happiness. My blood ran cold. What did you do? I told her to leave me alone and called security. But she said something that really bothered me. She said she wasn't going to give up because she had help now. What does that even mean? We found out what it meant the next day. My mom called, sounding devastated. I need to tell you something, she said. Tim, Fran's boyfriend, he came to see me yesterday. He told me that Fran has been lying to him about everything. She's been telling him that you stole James from her, that you've been sabotaging their relationship for years. Apparently, Tim had been helping Fran with her research into James's past, thinking he was helping her get closure. He'd been the one who helped her create the fake messages, not realizing what she was really planning to do with them. When he finally understood the extent of her obsession, he'd broken up with her and felt compelled to tell my mom everything. She's been staying with me since the breakup, my mom continued, but I can't have her here anymore. She's scaring me. She talks about you and James constantly, and she's convinced herself that if she can just prove you're wrong for each other, James will come back to her. The final straw came last weekend. James and I were having a quiet Saturday morning when we heard a commotion outside. We looked out the window to see Fran on our front lawn, screaming at the top of her lungs about how I was a fake and a homewrecker. She was completely unhinged, makeup running down her face, hair disheveled. But she wasn't alone. Standing next to her, filming everything on her phone, was her friend from high school, Sarah, who I vaguely remembered as being just as dramatic as Fran. Apparently, Sarah had been encouraging this whole thing, convincing Fran that she deserved James and that I was the villain in their love story. James called the police immediately while I watched in horror as Fran picked up rocks from our garden and threw them at our windows. She was screaming about how James had promised himself to her first, how their connection was deeper than what he and I had, how I was just a consolation prize. The police arrived within minutes, but by then, several neighbors had come out to see what was happening. It was mortifying. Fran was arrested for disturbing the peace and property damage, and Sarah was questioned but released. What broke my heart most was seeing the genuine fear in James's eyes. Not fear of Fran, but fear of what this was doing to our marriage. I never wanted any of this, he said after the police left. I just wanted a peaceful life with you. I'm so sorry she's putting you through this. That night, as we cleaned up the broken glass from our front window, I realized something important. This wasn't about whether James had feelings for Fran, or whether I was good enough for him. This was about Fran's inability to accept that the world doesn't revolve around her desires. She'd rather destroy everyone around her than accept that she can't have what she wants. The restraining order was approved this week. Fran is required to stay at least 500 feet away from us, our home, and our workplaces. My mom finally agreed to stop enabling her, though I know it's hard for her to cut off her own daughter. James and I are stronger than ever, but I'd be lying if I said this whole experience hasn't changed me. I'm more cautious now, more protective of our privacy. We're considering moving to a different neighborhood, somewhere Fran doesn't know, so we can truly start fresh. The irony isn't lost on me that Fran's desperate attempts to win James back have actually pushed us closer together. Every time she tries to drive a wedge between us, we end up more united. I finally understand that some people will never accept boundaries, and sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to cut them out completely, even if they're family. As for Fran, I have no idea what she's doing now. Part of me hopes she's getting help, but honestly, I'm just grateful she's not our problem anymore. For the first time in months, I can come home without looking over my shoulder, and that's worth more than any relationship with my sister ever was.